You're standing inside this warehouse in Arizona, and it's dry, it's dusty, totally nondescript. The kind of place you drive right by without even glancing at twice. Inside, the air is stale, and there are just these massive crates stacked all over the concrete floor. If you pry those crates open, you're looking at millions of dollars worth of lethal hardware. We are talking heavy machine guns, grenade launchers, thousands of rounds of ammunition, and this is maybe the most terrifying part. Stinger missile systems, kind specifically designed to take aircraft straight out of the sky. And standing right in the middle of all this arsenal, inspecting the goods with this critical eye, almost like a shopper checking produce for bruises, is a man named Peter Biar Ajak. Now, if you're listening to this and you follow African geopolitics, or honestly, if you spend any time in the halls of the Harvard Kennedy School, that name should make you do a serious double take.
Oh, absolutely. It's this massive cognitive dissonance because, Peter Biar Ajak wasn't known as some underground gunrunner. He was a celebrated peace activist, a respected scholar, a former World Bank economist. This is a guy who gave, TED-style talks on nonviolent conflict resolution and institution building.
And yet, there he was, caught right in the middle of a federal sting operation, negotiating the purchase of an arsenal to literally overthrow a sovereign government.
It's hard to believe.
It really is. So today, we are unpacking a story that is honestly just hard to wrap your head around.
This is a profound tragedy of institutional failure.
Yeah.
It's a really complex case study on what happens when a quote-unquote model citizen, a refugee who did everything right, decides that the democratic process is just too slow to save his people.
It's almost got this Breaking Bad trajectory to it, but played out on the stage of international relations. How do you go from sitting in a cubicle at the World Bank to standing in an Arizona warehouse looking at anti-tank weapons?
That is the central question. And to understand that warehouse, we really have to rewind the tape. We have to go back to the very beginning because Peter's life didn't start in the Ivy League.
No, it didn't.
It started in one of the most harrowing chapters of modern history.
The sources identify him as one of the lost boys of Sudan.
And I feel like that term, lost boys, has been used so much in the media that we sometimes just gloss over what it actually entails. We aren't talking about a Peter Pan story here.
Not even close. We're talking about the late 1980s. The Second Sudanese Civil War is just tearing the country apart. The Islamist government in the north is trying to impose Sharia law on the south, which is predominantly Christian and animist.
And the result is mass displacement.
Horrific displacement. Peter was part of this group of about 20,000 young boys, some of them as young as 6 or 7, who had to flee their burning villages.
And they didn't just, hop on a bus, they walked.
They trekked for months. We're talking about a 1,000-mile journey across the wilderness. They went to Ethiopia, they got chased out of there, went back into Sudan, and eventually made it to refugee camps in Kenya.
The reports detail some really horrific things.
Yeah. Starvation, dehydration, literally being attacked by lions.
Lions, yeah, I read that.
And constant strafing by helicopter gunships. It's just unimaginable trauma for a child. And the notes mention that Peter wasn't just a refugee, he was actually a child soldier for a period before he even made it to safety.
Right. By the time he was a teenager, he had seen more violence than most career soldiers see in a lifetime, but he survived. He made it to the Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. And then in 2001, the narrative completely shifts. He gets what is essentially a winning lottery ticket.
The resettlement program.
Exactly. He's one of about 4,000 lost boys chosen to be resettled in the United States. He lands in Philadelphia at age 17. And this is where the, quote, rise part of his story becomes almost mythical.
Because most people, understandably, would struggle just to adapt to the massive culture shocks.
Right, but Peter didn't just adapt, he conquered it.
I was looking at his academic resume in the file, and it is frankly intimidating. He does high school in Pennsylvania, college at LaSalle, then a master's degree from Harvard University. He eventually becomes a PhD candidate at Cambridge.
And professionally, he's hitting the exact same high notes. He becomes an economist at the World Bank. He's charming, he's brilliant, and he knows exactly how to navigate the corridors of power in Washington, D.C. He basically becomes the poster child for the refugee success story.
And he had a clear vision, too. He wasn't just building a comfortable career for himself. Because in 2011, South Sudan officially gains independence. It becomes Africa's 54th state, the world's newest country. And Peter goes back.
This is a crucial moment in the timeline. He returns to his homeland, not as a warlord, but as a bureaucrat. He becomes an advisor to the Minister of National Security. He marries Nyathon Hothmai, whose father is a really powerful general.
So he's embedding himself right into the new establishment.
Yes. There is a quote from him during this time that really stands out to me. He said, "The peace agreements must be protected by having the right policies in place." That's the key word, policies. At this stage, around 2011 to 2012, Peter is a true believer in systems. He believes in governance, in structure, in spreadsheets. He is living the dream his father fought for, but he's trying to secure it with intellect and diplomacy.
And in the history of South Sudan, there is always a tragic, but the dream didn't last.
No, it unraveled incredibly fast. Just 2 years after independence, in 2013, the political rivalry between President Salva Kiir and Vice President Riek Machar just explodes into open civil war.
The country fractures completely along ethnic lines. It becomes an unrelenting crisis of starvation and violence all over again.
And this is where we see the first major pivot in Peter's character arc. He realizes that writing policy papers inside a burning building just isn't working, so he steps out. He goes from being an insider to a vocal critic.
He starts the South Sudan Young Leaders Forum.
Right. He basically calls for a generational exit. He tells the old guard, the generals who fought for independence, that they failed and it's time for the youth to take over. Now, in a functioning democracy, that's just a standard campaign slogan.
Right, you put that on a bumper sticker.
Exactly. But in a military-run state like South Sudan, that is treason.
And the regime did not take it lightly. In 2018, while he was traveling for a youth conference, they grabbed him.
He was thrown into the Blue House. It's a notorious detention center in Juba. And we really need to pause on this experience because the psychologists and experts analyzing this case point to this precise moment as the catalyst. This is where the break happens.
He was held for about 18 months, initially without any charges. Eventually, they convict him of disturbing the peace and inciting an uprising. But the conditions... The report describes him as physically broken when he came out.
It was brutal. He was severely underweight, suffering from liver and kidney problems. He had severe back issues from sleeping on bare concrete. But the physical toll is really only half of the story.
Yeah, think about the psychological wiring here.
Exactly. You have a man who spent his life believing in education, policy, and Western institutions. Then he's locked up, completely helpless, watching his country fall further into chaos while he rots in a cell.
So the system he believed in completely failed him.
Precisely. The policy wonk essentially died in that cell. When he was finally pardoned and released in 2020, largely thanks to heavy pressure from the U.S. government, he returned to America. And to the outside world, he was still the peace activist. He was giving interviews, writing op-eds.
Though privately.
Privately, the calculus had completely changed. He had decided that if the system was broken, he was going to break the system.
So he's back in the U.S. in 2020. He reunites with his family. He lands a fellowship at the National Endowment for Democracy. But he's plotting. And this brings us to what the sources call the sting. This part of the story reads straight out of a heist movie script.
It really does. It starts with networking. Peter is very, very good at getting into rooms with influential people. Through his connections, he gets into the orbit of Garry Kasparov, the chess grandmaster and human rights activist.
And just to be perfectly clear for any lawyers listening, Kasparov is not accused of any wrongdoing here.
No, absolutely not. Kasparov is essentially an innocent connector in this web. But through that network, Peter gets introduced to a man named Robert Granieri. Granieri is a billionaire, the founder of Jane Street, which is a massive quantitative trading firm. We're talking serious Wall Street money.
So you have a former refugee scholar pitching a Wall Street quantitative trading genius. What exactly is the pitch?
The pitch was humanitarian aid. Peter tells Granieri that he needs funding for civic and humanitarian activities to help restore democracy in South Sudan. He leverages his entire reputation as a scholar and a victim of the regime. And Granieri, thinking he's supporting a genuinely noble cause, pledges roughly $7 million.
$7 million. I mean, that buys a lot of grain, medicine, and school books.
It does. But Peter wasn't shopping for school books, and this is where the deception gets incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah.
Peter connects with people he thinks are illicit arms dealers. In reality, they are undercover federal agents.
And he has a major problem at this point, right? He has legitimate money from a billionaire, but he wants to buy illegitimate goods. How does he plan to bridge that gap without Granieri finding out?
He pitched the agents on what he called creative invoicing.
Creative invoicing. That is a terrifyingly corporate euphemism for federal fraud.
It really is. He proposed that the arms dealers create fake contracts for things like consulting services, humanitarian logistics, or democracy workshops. He would use Granier's money to pay these invoices.
Wow.
Yeah, the bank sees a consulting fee. Granieri sees a receipt for aid work, and the dealers ship the weapons.
He is effectively laundering humanitarian aid to fund a private war.
Exactly. He's weaponizing the West's desire to help.
And when we say war, we really need to look at the shopping list. You mentioned stingers earlier.
Oh.
Why specifically those?
The list was highly specific and entirely offensive in nature. He wanted Stinger missiles, grenade launchers, anti-tank weapons, and heavy machine guns. He wasn't looking for small arms for self-defense. He was looking for gear that could take out armored vehicles and helicopters. This was an invasion inventory.
And he didn't just want the guns. He had a very clear plan for how to use them. The court documents mention a specific memo he shared with the undercover agents.
Yes, the Operation Free South Sudan memo. It was an 18-page document, and honestly, this is the most damning piece of evidence in the whole file. It shows the premeditation. The strategy was completely Machiavellian.
What was the actual play there?
He planned to use the weapons to fuel a public uprising, but here's the really dark twist. He wanted the government to crack down. He wanted the regime to attack protesters because that chaos and bloodshed would create the justification for him to unleash his heavy weapons.
That is incredibly cynical. He was basically planning to use civilian safety, or the lack of it, as a strategic pawn to trigger a coup.
It's the ultimate logic of violent revolution. You create a crisis so big that you become the only solution. And his goal? He told the agents explicitly that he intended to become the interim president of South Sudan.
Interim. It's always interim, isn't it?
It always is. Later, in court, he tried to walk that back. He claimed to the judge that he was just one of several potential candidates for a transitional government. But on the tapes, in the heat of the moment with the fake arms dealers, he was absolutely positioning himself as the savior who would take the throne.
So the pieces are moving, the money is pledged, the dealers say the goods are ready, and then comes March 2024.
The climax. Peter travels to that warehouse in Arizona we talked about at the beginning. He thinks he's there to inspect the shipment before it gets smuggled out.
He walks in. He sees the missiles. He probably feels this massive rush of adrenaline, thinking, this is it. I'm finally going to do what the peace treaties couldn't.
And then the doors lock, the badges come out. Federal agents, you're under arrest.
The fallout must have been immediate. He was a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School at the time.
Immediate administrative leave. His academic career evaporated in seconds. But the reaction from the South Sudanese community was even more telling. Pan Lowell, who runs a major news blog and is a very significant voice in that diaspora, had previously celebrated Peter. But after the arrest, he wrote that if these charges were true, Peter had jeopardized regional stability.
Which is a polite, diplomatic way of saying he nearly set the entire Horn of Africa on fire.
Exactly. You introduce Stinger missiles into an already volatile civil war. That doesn't just stay in South Sudan. That spills over borders. It changes the entire balance of power in East Africa.
So, faced with the tapes, the emails, the warehouse visit, he pleads guilty.
He pleaded guilty to conspiring to violate U.S. weapons export laws.
And the sentence?
He was sentenced to 46 months in prison, plus 3 years of probation.
Less than 4 years. For trying to run a missile smuggling ring and start a coup. I have to ask, does that feel light to you?
It was a plea deal, which usually knocks time off, but the prosecutors didn't let him off easily in the moral argument. During the sentencing phase, they made a comparison that I think really anchors this whole story.
What do they say?
They pointed out that Peter wasn't the only one with a tragic backstory. There were nearly 20,000 other lost boys who came to the U.S. men who had the exact same background. The same starvation, the same lion attacks, the same trauma, and the prosecutor noted, quite bitingly, that those other 20,000 men did not direct a complex illegal weapons scheme.
Ouch. That really cuts right through the I had no choice defense.
It really does. It acknowledges that while his trauma was real and the situation in South Sudan is indeed desperate, his choices were his own. He chose deception, he chose violence.
And he chose to betray the trust of people who were trying to help.
I keep thinking about Granieri, the financier. He thought he was saving lives. He was almost the unwitting financier of a bloodbath. It's the ultimate betrayal of the humanitarian instinct. Peter took the language of human rights, the very language he learned at Harvard and the World Bank, and he weaponized it to buy actual weapons.
It really forces us to look at the complexity of nation building. We love the narrative of the scholar returning home to fix his broken country. It's a clean story. But when the fixing gets hard...
The scholar picked up a gun, and that's the real tragedy here. Peter Biar Ajak spent his entire adult life studying how to build peace. He wrote papers on it, he gave speeches on it. He knew better than almost anyone how fragile peace is. But in the end, whether out of desperation, ambition, or a mix of both, he decided that the only way to build peace was to force it through the barrel of a machine gun.
So let's bring this back to the listener. Why does the story of Peter Biar Ajak matter to us sitting here today?
I think it matters because it exposes the incredibly thin line between a freedom fighter and a criminal. We tend to romanticize rebels in our history books. We love the underdog who overthrows the tyrant, but
Right.
in real time, it looks like fraud. It looks like arms deals. It looks like dangerous instability.
It's also a serious warning about the savior complex. Peter seemed to genuinely believe he was the only one who could fix his country. And that belief justified everything in his mind, lying to his friends, defrauding donors, breaking federal laws.
And it leaves us with a really uncomfortable what-if scenario. Suppose the FBI hadn't been watching. Suppose the undercover agents were real arms dealers.
If he had gotten those missiles.
If he had smuggled them in, launched his revolution, toppled the regime, and actually installed a democracy, how would we view him today?
That's the question. Would history call him a hero? Or does the method matter more than the outcome?
Can you ever truly build a stable democracy on a foundation of fraud and Stinger missiles?
I have a feeling the answer is no, but history is full of people who tried.
It certainly is.
And that leads me to one last thought to leave you with. If prominent activists are willing to defraud wealthy donors by disguising missile payments as humanitarian aid, what does that do to the future of actual charity? If billionaires get burned like this, do they just stop funding the life-saving aid that people actually need?
That is a terrifying ripple effect.